Hello, everyone. So today we're going to do lists part one. And lists are a really important part of computer science and of this class. And so, like all the other pre-recorded lectures, I really urge you to do the exercises with me as we go through. Um, very small amounts of information are retained through passive learning, something like 1%. So you really want to be doing something to be learning. Okay, so in Python, a sequence is some kind of object that contains multiple items of data, and they're stored in some kind of sequence one after another. So Python provides different types of sequences, including lists. And you don't have to worry about this right now, but the difference between a list and a tuple is that a list is mutable and a tuple is not. Now, the thing is, when you're working with lists, um, the thing that you really need to get is that you need to work with the list's indices, and you really have to become very familiar with indices. So here is example of a list. So we have a sequence of data. Here there's some names. And the thing is, so they're listed and each element or item in the list has an index number. So you can see that here where it says indices. So with a list, the index number always starts with 0. And students can sometimes forget this and think that it starts with 1, but it always starts with 0. So if you're coming from CS 107, when you worked with lists, they started at index 1. That is no longer the case. And generally in computer science, we always start with 0. So what that means is if you go up to the last index number, it's always 1 less than the length of the list. So you can see here that this list has 6 items in it. So it has a length of 6, but the last index number is 5. So it's a length minus 1. So that's really important to remember as well when working with lists. You can also actually have indices that start from the back. So here, this one could be -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6. But here you can see it actually starts at not at 0. So if you do end up ever wanting to call working from the back, you'd have to say -1 for the very last one, and then minus, the length for the very first one. So as I said, so there's this built-in function, and we'll go over it, len, which returns the length of the list. So this is the number of elements. And as I said, it's not the index of the last character. Now, the thing is, we as programmers access elements of a list through the indices. So indices are really like the key to the list, right? So you have to get very comfortable with accessing or changing or deleting items in a list using the indices. So in Python, lists are denoted by square brackets. So here's some examples. So this is the variable name on the left. And this is going to be data type list. And then you have a square bracket, and then you separate the elements in your list with a comma, and then you close a square bracket. So here's a list of integers, here's a list of strings. This is a list of floats, and this has mixed data. So you can have mixed data in Python as well. So this has strings and integers and floats. And you'll hear me say element. So by element, I mean an item in the list. You can also display the whole list using print. So let's actually start working with lists. So please go ahead and open up your terminal and go into your interactive mode, and let's create a list numbers. And we'll just create a very simple list and then let's have a look at it. So there's our list numbers. If we did type numbers, you can see this is a data type list. Make this a bit bigger. Okay. Make this narrower. So we're going to go through a whole bunch of things that you can do with lists. Now, if we have a list and then we have the asterisks, we can actually repeat that list however many times, n times as we want. So for example, here if we had 1, 2, 3, and we wanted to repeat that, say 4 times, then we could just do that, and that would return a list with 1, 2, 3 repeated 4 times. We can also concatenate or join lists together. So for example, we could say 1, 2, 3, and then we concatenate that with 4, 5, 6. And that creates one list. Now, most importantly, we have the built-in Python function len. So let's look at the length of our list numbers that we created. And as you can see, that's 5. We've got 5 elements in that list. Now, let's start to learn how to access elements in a list using the index. So let's look at our list again, numbers. So if I want to access the first element in the list, I can say numbers, square bracket, and then I put the index number. So I want to access the first one, so that's index number 0. I close my square brackets, and that will give me the first element in my list. Now, think for a moment, what index number would give you the last element in this list? So think about that for a moment and then try it. So let's see. So there's, 5 elements in the list. Let's see what happens if we try to say numbers 5. So you will get this error, and I want you to get familiar with this error, this list index out of range. What this is telling you is that there is no index 5 in this list. And why is that? So if we go back and look at this slide, this had 6 elements. Remember, the last index is always the length minus 1. So our length is 5. So in order to access the last element in the list, we would need to say index 4. And you can see that returns 5. So you can use your list index to access elements. So you should try accessing various elements in your list. So again, here the list index starts at 0, not 1. We can also use the indices to assign new values. So let's keep working with our list numbers. So let's just check, there it is. So say we wanted to change, let's say we wanted to change, well, we'll go with what's on here, the third index. So first of all, let's go and check it. So third index is 4, because remember it goes 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So let's change that. So we say numbers, index 3, which is going to be the value 4, equals, let's say 37. Okay. Now let's look at our numbers. So you can see here now that index 3 has value 37. So that's been changed. So this is very important assignment. So remember that one. We can also use negative numbers to index from the end. So for example, if we wanted to say numbers minus 1, that would give us the last element, and so forth. So you can work. Oh, something nice to show you is if I wanted to say numbers, actually this is going to look really long and clumsy. but I could say, so say I wanted to access the last element in the list. I didn't know how many elements there were. I could just say the length of the numbers. See what we got here. Oh, I have to have square brackets. I'm sorry. We have to say the length of the numbers minus 1, and that will give us the last element in the list. And then this is also like the other way around. You can say um, the whole length, but you're starting from the end. So you say minus the whole length. But honestly, like you're not going to be doing stuff like that too much, so don't worry about that. But it's very important to remember that you've got the length minus 1 as the last element in the list. Okay, so now we move on to loops and lists. So this is really important. So here we have a list names. It's got some names in it. Let's have a look at if we wanted to go ahead and print every item in the list using a while loop. Let's have a look at how we could do that. So I suggest that you write out the code. You can call it, I called it list underscore loop.py. You can run the code. So if you like, let's actually do that together. So let's exit out of this and we can go to where you save your file and it'll say list underscore loop. So you can see here that this while loop will print out each element in the list. Now, let's look deeper into how this works. So let's copy this and go ahead and open up Python Tutor Visualize. And I'll zoom in a bit here. And then let's visualize the execution. So here's our list. And then we start with index I equals 0, and we say while I is less than the length of the list. So the length of the list will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? Then we're going to print the list name, and then we're accessing the element by its index number, which is here as I, and then we're incrementing I and we're going through the loop again. And as long as I is less than the length of the list, we're going to print the next index number. So let's step through. So here you can't see the full thing, but here if I move this way, so the list is created. So there's our variable names, and here is our list with our index numbers at the top. Go to the next line. Then I equals 0 is created. I'll move back this way so you can see that as well. Then we're going to go ahead and enter our while loop. So I is less than length of names. Remember, length of names is 5. So we're going to print names index 0. So the index 0 is Sue. So Sue gets printed. Then I gets incremented. So I will equal 1. 1 is less than 5. So then we're going to print names with index 1, which is Anne. So there's Anne. Then we increment I. So I is 2. 2 is less than 5. So then we're going to go and print names where index is 2, and that's Sally. So there's Sally. Increment I. We do the same thing for index 3. So we print Jill. We increment I. So this, remember now I is 4, right? 4 is still less than 5. So we get to print index 4. So Kamala gets printed. Then we increment I. Now I is 5. 5 is not less than 5. So then we can exit out of our while loop and we stop. So that's how it's working with our while loop. Yeah. Okay. Now let's have a look at a slightly different example using a list and for loop. So here we have our list numbers, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now we say for n in numbers, print n times 2. So let's first of all have a look at what this looks like. Oh, I have to save. Save. And you can see that each element in the list gets multiplied by 2. So what's happening here? So let's copy this and go through this together in Python Tutor. Visualize. Okay. So first of all, our list numbers gets created, and there's its indices, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and here are the numbers. Now this line is very important for n in numbers. Now n is the target variable, and here n is going to represent each of the values in this list, one at a time. So that's very important. So here it's not representing the index number, it's representing the value. So let's have a look. So in the first iteration, n has a value 5. So you notice here, it's not like I equals 0. It's not an index number. It's the actual value. It's the first element in the list. Then it's going to get multiplied by 2, so you print 10. Then on the next iteration, n has a value 6, because that's the value of the second item in the list. So that gets multiplied by 2. Then n has the next item in the list, which is 7. So we multiply that. Then n has a value 8. So you can see on each iteration, it has the value of what's next in the list. And then we finish. So here, the way that it's being used is that it's got the value, not the index number. So this is 2 examples. Now, what I've also done is put in a link to lists and for loops in here. So I think it would be really good for us to go through this together. Let me refresh this. And understand 2 kinds of for loops. And I'll be going through this again and again, especially in list part 2, but I wanted to introduce the concept here. So here is an example of a list and a for loop by item. And here is an example of a list and a for loop by index. So let's have a look at each example. So I'm going to say show code lens. So here is our list. You can see fruits, apple, orange, banana, cherry. So here we have the target variable is a fruit. So for a fruit, in fruits, print a fruit. So let's have a look. So here is our list, fruits with our different items. You can see them all here. Now, the first iteration of our for loop, a fruit has the value apple because this is by item. So the value of the target variable, like we looked in the last example, is not the index number, it's the actual value. So again, apple gets printed. Then the next iteration, a fruit has the value orange because it's the next item in the list. So it has the value orange. It'll be banana, print banana, and then it'll be cherry. And then we finish. So that's using a for loop by item, and it's what we saw in the last example too. Now let's do the same piece of code, but using a for loop by index. So you can see here you have a target variable, but instead of having just the name of the list, we're going to use range, the length of the fruits list, and then when we print, we say the list, and then we're going to use an index number. So you can see here that the target variable position is being used as an index number. rather than an item. So let's have a look at how that works. So here's our list: fruits, apple, orange, banana, cherry. Then we go into our for loop. Position has a value 0. Okay. So what is the length of fruits? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So length will be 4. And this is where all that work on range, n+1, really comes into play now. So remember when we were doing range, I said it will make sense why it's so weird when you start working with lists. And here it is, because we're going to say range 4. And remember, it's n+1. And remember, the last index number is 3, which is n+1. It's all clicking into place now, I hope. Okay, so let's keep going. All right. Don't want that highlighted. Okay. So we said, if we go back real quick. So now we're here at this line. So we're going to say fruits index 0 is apple. So we're going to print apple. And then we go to the next iteration. Now position has a value 1, because remember range, it starts at 0 and it keeps incrementing by default if there's no parameters. So now it has the value 1. And we go fruits index 1, and that is orange. So we're going to print orange. Then position will have the value 2. Banana has the index 2. And then it will have the position 3. And if I go here, you'll see that cherry has index number 3. And then remember, what do? We say range 4. So we went 0, 1, 2, 3, and we stop. So the for loop stops. And that's how you do a for loop with a list by index. So you can see it's really nice now. Hopefully why range was so weird is starting to click in place, because lists start at 0 and they end at the length -1, just like range. Okay, so please take the time to study these. And as we move forward, I will say, is this for loop by index? Is this for loop by item? Can you write this code by index? Can you write it by item? So you want to get familiar with those two. Okay. So things we continue with. So things you can do. So you can test if an item is in a list. So let's clear and let's go back into our interactive mode. So we can use this different. So we can say a list equals 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let me check a list. So let's say we use this Python built-in keyword in, 5 in a list. 5 is in the list. Let's say 10 is in a list, and it is not, so that's false. We can also use not in. So we could say 10 not in a list, and that is true. You see, because it's not in there. Now slicing. So you can create sub-lists using slicing. So let's take this example. So I'm just going to copy this into the terminal. So you can do Control-Shift-V into the terminal. So let's check our odd numbers. There it is. So say, for example, I wanted to take some sub list from here. I could slice it. So the way slicing works is you have your square brackets and you use your indices to denote which elements of the list you want to take. Now, you always start with the first index that you want to use, but the second index is not inclusive. So it's a bit like range. It's like the end+1. Now, what I did was I copied this text in from Gaddis because I think the way that Gaddis does it with the end is misleading. It's not end, it's n+1. And they even say in the instructions it doesn't include the end. But then this thing that they put in the book is misleading. So I put it as n+1. So let's have a look. So if we wanted to say small list, right? Let's have a look at small list. There is small list, right? So we've taken, started with index 3, so that's 0, 1, 2, 3. So we've taken 7. And then so we've got index 3, 4, 5. And you can see index 6 is not included. So that's why I'm saying it's n+1, right? The other thing you can do is if you don't put any index number, it will go all the way to the end or the beginning, wherever it is. So here, for example, if we did big list, oh, you have to do capital N, like that, big list, and then you look at big list, like this, you'll see that it starts with index 2 and then it goes all the way to the end because there's nothing there. So this should be capital N like this. Good. All right. So you can also assign multiple items using slicing. So you saw how we assigned an item before. This is good review, so we'll do it again. So we have a big long list, list A. Let's copy this in. This. So here's list A. And then say we want to change the values of indices 2, 3, 4, and 5. Right? So let's say we change them to these values. And now let's look at list A. And you can see that these values have been added in. Yeah. We can also remove multiple items by just assigning an empty list. So 2 square brackets next to each other with nothing in between is an empty list. So if we can just use this on the list we just created. So if we did this, and then we look at list A, you can see indices 2, 3, 4, and 5 have been deleted. Okay. Now we also have a delete statement del, so you can delete an element from a list. So for example, sure, let's do foo list. Let's create a new list, foo list, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see. I'm going to delete item 2. So we say index 1. And there you go, 2 has been deleted. You can also delete using your slices. So let's actually make our foo list a little bit longer, and I'll say I'm going to delete indices 1 and 2. And then you can see here that indices 1 and 2 have been deleted, so that items 2 and 3. Good. Now, a few more things about lists. So if you assign one list to another, it makes both of the variables point to the same list. So if you change one of the elements in one of the lists, it will change the elements in the other list as well. So let's have a look and see what this means. Let me make this a bit narrower and do this together. Okay, so let's say list 1 equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now let's say list 2 equals list 1. Now let's change one of the elements in list 2. So we'll change index 2 to 42. So first of all, let's check list 2. So there's the 42, right? Now let's check list 1. There's the 42. And if you were to say, is list 1 equal to list 2? The answer would be true. So this is because list 1 and list 2 are both pointing, the variables are pointing to the same list. So if anything gets changed in there, they'll both point to the change. Now you could, if you wanted to, copy a list without them pointing to the same thing. So here is a way to do that. So for example, we could say list A equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we can say list B equals list A, and then we're going to copy it by doing a slicing from the beginning to the end. So there's no index numbers in there, it's just beginning to end. So if we check list B, it's the same. Now let's change index 2 in list B to 42, and let's list B. There it is, the change. Now let's list A. You can see there is no change because they are not pointing to the same list. So if we say list B is equal to list A, it is false. Good. So there's a lot of stuff here, but the thing that I want to point your attention to the most are the loops. So make sure you get those down. And the other thing is make sure you understand indices and how they work.